Today, 2 hours of news, current affairs, and opinion, brought to you by Beyond Beijing. With in-depth panel discussions on domestic and global issues, Today brings you the story behind the headlines. Locally produced, but with a distinctly international flavor. Today.
I'm Brandon Blackburn-Dwyer. Welcome to Today on Beyond Beijing.
And I'm Zhao Yang. Today's big debate is on income inequality between male and female workers in China.
And after our big debate, Xu Jindou will be joining me for the Global Talk. We'll start out with North Korea's unexpected rocket launch. Then it's U.S. President Barack Obama saying his nation will formally recognize Syrian rebels. Egypt's military calling for national unity talks. Mali forcing out its prime minister. And Yemen's leaders fighting over missiles. Then our China report brings us the head of the Chinese Communist Party promising more reforms, 7 billion RMB investment for solar energy, more rights for foreign green card holders, and Beijing considering a duty-free zone downtown. Then our global spotlight turns to tech to hear about a group buying Kodak patents, Apple patents rejected by the U.S. government, and Alipay providing mobile financial services.
Then our Online Unleashed brings us your views on the U.S. state of Michigan stripping unions of power with a new right to work law.
Now, turning to the big debate, former Chinese leader Mao Zedong once said, "Women hold up half the sky." And today, China leads the world in the percentage of women gainfully employed. Yet contemporary female workers are struggling with a widening income gap from their male peers. Zhou Jingnan tells us more.
A study by the All China Women Federation says the income of Chinese female urban workers, when compared to their male peers, has fallen by 10% and by over 20% in rural areas. The survey suggests the income gap between men and women is growing partly because of sexual discrimination. According to another report done by the Ministry of Human Resources and Social Security, gender is one of the 5 most cited factors for job discrimination. The report says 8% of female respondents have lost their jobs because of their gender, twice the number of cases reported by men. In an interview with Shanghai's Dragon TV, Xiao Deng, a female job seeker, says she had to quit her job after getting pregnant.
My ex-boss kept telling me that the company was too small to find a replacement once I take the maternity leave, and that I would cost him further money during the leave since he has to pay my salary. I couldn't take the pressure anymore, so I quit.
The studies also blame gender-based income inequality on poor enforcement of regulations protecting women's rights and difficulty in collecting evidence of gender discrimination. It's not all bad news, though, as China has made achievements in attracting women to the workplace. According to European International Business School's professor Li Xiujuan, the percentage of gainfully employed Chinese women is 70%, the highest in the world. However, Li points out the percentage of female senior managers is still below 20%. Li says one reason is that many women still impose a glass ceiling on their own achievements and are unable to recognize the skills they have which can help them develop their careers. To solve inequality, the UN Women's China office is urging companies to become agents of social change in China by promoting gender equality internally and in the communities they serve. For Today on Beyond Beijing, I'm Zhou Jingnan.
Well, thank you, Jingnan. Today, our panel of experts will first look at the situation in China for female workers, the decline in parity between men's and women's incomes, solutions to the problem, and outlook for women working in China.
So today we are talking in the studio with Julia Broussard, Country Program Manager at the UN Women China office, and Robert Parkinson, Founder and CEO of RMG International Business Consulting Corporation. And also joining us on the phone is Hema Kripalini, a journalist and radio host working in Beijing.
Welcome to you all. Good to have you with us.
Good morning.
Hi.
Good morning.
Let me start out here in the office, in the studio. Julia, your organization was actually referenced in our background report, so I have to ask you, are we seeing a crisis here in the differences between the treatment of men and women in the workplace in China?
I would not go so far as to call it a crisis. I think that's a little bit too strong because obviously with so many women in the workforce, they're being productive and being rewarded for that. But there are significant problems, shall we say.
Okay, significant problems. Robert, looking at it from the corporate side, significant problems, significant gaps, how do you define it?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I would agree with Julia that I don't think there's a crisis. And actually, I would say that in the last 20 years, compared to the last decade, really, women enjoy much better positions in companies. I think for entry-level appointments or people in their 20s and early 30s, I would say for international companies anyway, there is little discrimination between men and women. I think the discrimination starts when you get into fairly senior management positions. But I think, I would take a fairly optimistic view and say that has been great progress made. This follows in a sense a pattern of a country developing. If you look at the Soviet Union post end of that period, the woman's role was much more profound. If you look at, for example, people like Emily Pankhurst getting women the vote in the UK in the last century, it kind of follows a pattern that when any country develops in a substantial rate, and China has certainly developed at a very substantial rate, women will naturally follow in their evolution and their importance.
Okay, how do you see it?
Yes, looking at the number of women employees in the workforce as per statistics published in China Daily, women make about 45% of all employees in the workforce, and while 1 in 4 entrepreneurs is female. China has done remarkable progress on this front, but still a lot needs to be done. But I must say that here, as per the Global Gender Gap Index introduced by the World Economic Forum, no country in the world has been able to fully address this issue. So China stands at the 69th rank, and in China about 60% of women have equal access to economic opportunities. If I now compare this with India, India and China, the two countries with similar population, labor force participation rate in China is 70%, whereas in India is 25%. Overall Chinese women are about twice as likely as Indian women to work full-time for an employee. That stands to 21% to 11%. And this difference are greater among women at higher education level. 53% of Chinese women with tertiary education have a good job, whereas only 17% of highly educated Indian women.
And Julie, actually, is there a global trend towards more or less parity in pay between the two sexes?
There's a global trend toward more inequality in general, not just in terms of gender, but also in terms of other disparities. We're seeing it in United States and Western Europe. The middle class is being narrowed out, and the extreme ends of the income spectrum are growing in almost all countries of the world.
But may I put a slightly opposing point to that? There's a lot of data and research that I've uncovered that seems to suggest that, in fact, women, particularly in senior level positions, are really being encouraged. And I'll give you a couple of examples there. In Hong Kong, there is an organisation called the 30% Club, which encourages the Hong Kong companies to have at least 30% of their boards comprised by women. If you look in Europe, in Norway in 2005, there was a piece of legislation to make it a statutory obligation of listed companies that 40% of boards should be women, and that has proven to be quite successful. There were doubts as to whether they could find the women, but it has proven that actually they can be found, and it is a good idea. So I think we are moving towards a better situation on a global basis. Clearly, different Western countries will have a different perspective. The EU is more of a left-wing institution, and therefore is likely to take one view, whereas America is perhaps a little bit more conservative in their approach. But I think China certainly is making good progress. If you look at the new labour law in, I think, 2006, 2007, that went on to imbue in the constitution rights for not just women but workers in general. And I think steps like that are very positive towards better social conditions for women.
And Hema, you have been working in China for a few years. So how do you see it? How does China compare to the rest of the world in terms of the women's employment and their pay for the same job?
I mean, as far as my personal experience is concerned, I'm very happy. I don't see any kind of discrimination, at least at my workplace. Everything is going on very smooth and there is no such discrimination. But yes, definitely, there is a discrimination. I mean, the disparity is a word which no women like to hear. I mean, the global trend is to minimize and ideally remove the discrimination. I mean, governments all over the world are bringing in equal opportunities law. But I mean, problem still lies in execution. So this is what I think.
Now, looking at the situation, one of the questions, I guess, Julia, when you're looking at culturally, when you're dealing with the, let's say, not the income and the numbers and how different women are treated here, but how would you see culturally the approach here in China in how women are treated as workers in the workplace?
I think actually it's very mixed. So we have two traditions at the same time. We have the modern tradition of women hold up half the sky. I think the gains in women's labor force participation are primarily because of Mao Zedong and the push starting in the 1950s to get women into the workforce as part of their patriotic duty, as part of the building up of the Chinese economy. But at the same time, the old traditions have not died out. We still have 重男轻女, men are worth more than women. And 男主外,女主内, men take care of external affairs, women take care of domestic affairs. And those traditions are still very strong here. They haven't disappeared.
Okay, now, Robert, what I want to ask you, I mean, sort of differentiating here, looking at, you've said, I think earlier on in the show, you said that international companies don't discriminate. But China has a very sort of differentiated work environment. We have multinational corporations taking up a fairly significant portion in Beijing and Shanghai. Yeah. We have a smaller portion of Chinese private companies, both small and large. And then, of course, state-owned enterprises. Do you see a significant difference in the treatment of women in these different, shall we say, backgrounds of international industries?
Well, I think just to clarify my point about international companies not discriminating, one of the interesting things about people from particularly Europe, actually, who come to China, Europe, which is a card carrier for rights for everyone and women's rights and so on and so on and so on. People will come here and then brief us. We're a recruiting firm. They will give us mandates where they will be explicit in their desire for we must have a man or we must have a woman. And this is coming for a European or American or Western person. This isn't coming necessarily from a Chinese person. So I actually I see rather disgustingly people who in their home country would stand up for people's rights. I see them abandon those rights when they come to China because they can, which I think is not so good. I just want to come back on the point that my colleague was making a second ago. I think let's move on from that. I've forgotten what I was going to say, actually.
Okay, no, Julie, firstly, Hema, I have Julie in the studio here so I can see you nodding along here. Differences of behavior for international corporations from their home country to their experiences here in China. Well, what's going on there? I mean, are companies that, say, in the U.S. wouldn't dream of discriminating sexually coming to China and saying, hey, it's an unregulated market, I can discriminate freely?
Well, I don't have the evidence that Robert has on that. But what's going on is in the West, the anti-discrimination laws are very strictly enforced. It's very hard for any company to get away with any form of discrimination, much less gender-based. But in China, there are laws, but they're not strongly enforced. So in that space, any company, international Chinese, can come in and say, oh, well, we're going to ignore this for the time being. That's the real problem.
I think that's a very, very good point. And if you look at, for example, migrant workers and workers coming from rural areas to the cities to work in, particularly women, one of the issues they have is a lack of access to good information about what rights they do in fact have. So, this information is being withheld for them, and that would certainly help them.
How do you compare it? I mean, are we looking at an environment that's not regulated enough in terms of letter of the law, or is it simply not awareness of already having good laws?
See, I'll like to raise a point here. We're talking about the laws. Okay, there are laws in UK, US, or in China. How they are implemented, I'm not looking at it. But I want to raise a point here that mistreatment between the men and women at the workplace, I mean, that comes in various forms. I mean, that is threat to professional status, public humiliation or belittling opinions, or there's an isolation. Sometimes women are isolated from certain company areas or projects, or sometimes it is physical or social, or it can be an overwork, under pressure or impossible or tight deadlines or unnecessary disruptions. I mean, how to deal with that? Which law is there? Is countries having any law or any protection laws? So can my friends elaborate on this point? How to treat this kind of mistreatment with women at the workplace?
I totally agree with Hema. And another related issue is sexual harassment in the workforce. And that's quite prevalent. Under one of our projects, they carried out a study in several major factory corporations, and 20% of employees reported that they'd been subjected to sexual harassment. Men can also be harassed, but predominantly it was women who suffered.
All right, well, then we're going to take a pause in the conversation here. From the sort of broader situation, we're going to tighten in on the decline in parity of incomes in the next section of our show, looking at where pay inequality comes from, what's causing it, how it's justified, and then, of course, in the third section, how to fix all of these various problems. You're listening to Today on Beyond Beijing.
The green hills and the clear water, the lifestyle and the culture. East or west, China's Guilin is the best.
You're listening to Today on Beyond Beijing. I'm Brandon Blackburn-Dwyer. Today's big debate is on the income gap between Chinese women and men.
And I'm Zhao Yang. Today we are talking in the studio with Julia Broussard from the UN Women China office and Robert Parkinson from RMG, International Business Consulting Corporation. And also join us on the phone is Hema Kripalena, a journalist working in Beijing. But now back to our discussions. Robert, there is a study by the All China Women's Federation says the income of Chinese female urban workers when compared to their male peers has fallen by 10% and by over 20% in rural areas. So first of all, when we focus on the urban areas, what do you think, what do you attribute the fall in women's salaries to?
Well, I think what I would say to that is the first thing you've got to do is probably define further which urban workers you're talking about, because an urban worker could be someone working in a bar, or it could be a white-collar worker working in a company. The evidence I have for my business suggests that there's very little difference in the professional and junior management bracket of salaries between, say, 10 and 50,000 RMB a month. There's very little difference between salaries between men and women. That's a highly competitive market for the right talent and the right skills, and companies will compete for the correct skill set. I think where there may be disparity is in the migrant workforce that have come from the countryside to seek jobs in Beijing, and it's fairly well documented that conditions are harsh for these people. Salaries are very low. They're living in a dormitory, which is not particularly nice, and because there are so many of these people, that may cause the lack of parity in the statistics.
And Julie, actually, especially for urban environment, because we have the anti-discrimination law in China. So, but how do companies justify paying women less than men? Maybe they have other channels. For example, they don't give the same. They don't give the woman opportunity for promotion, and then they can get less. So which do you think? What do you think?
I think it's mainly an opportunity gap. So you start at, college-educated women as opposed to college-educated men. They're less likely to go into the high-paying fields. And there's an opportunity gap there because of gender stereotypes of what types of job are appropriate for women, what types of jobs are appropriate for men. The high-tech jobs, the higher-paying jobs are more likely for men to go into that field and have the right qualifications. Also, in terms of opportunities, just getting their foot in the door for certain types of jobs is also a challenge for women, because we're seeing advertisements out there, job advertisements, saying men only or men preferred for certain types of jobs. And so if you get into the workplace, you're not going to see a big gap between men and women in that particular workplace. But when you look at the spectrum of all jobs, that's where the gap exists.
So, I mean, I would make a slightly different spin on that point, if you like. I think I wouldn't probably call it a gender stereotype. I would believe that, through natural makeup, women are slightly better at certain jobs and men are slightly better at others. And that trend seems to have followed with the Chinese education system, where you have a lot of men going in for engineering or IT engineering roles, and women are going in for roles, for example, in human resources and management. And actually, in my opinion, I have a company where 2/3 of the workforce are women. In my opinion, women are better in commercial, client-facing roles which are about dealing with other people, roles which require a high degree of emotional intelligence and needing to keep calm. Men are very into building relationships and so on, and that's a whole other discussion in China in terms of how you evolve the more traditional way of doing business, the baijiu drinking and the partying and dinner parties, which is pretty tough really for a woman to get involved with. So I think men and women are different. I think I don't deny that, and I would disagree with anyone who does. And I think people have gone into roles which are appropriate for them. And I think it's a good idea for China's economy if women are better in certain roles to encourage encourage them down that route. And I think we need to see more women in CEO and top-level positions.
I'd just like to challenge that a little bit. Okay. And we're not seeing a wealth of scientific evidence that women actually are naturally worse at engineering or science than men. What we're seeing is a trend that starts in grade school in terms of what boys and girls are told that they are likely to be good at and what is a typical profession for boys as opposed to girls. In addition, we have to ask, why are these very male occupations higher paying than these very female occupations? Is it because intrinsically they're a bit higher value? If a woman is very good at organizing and handling relationships, that has to be valued in the workforce. So why wouldn't those jobs be paid equally as an engineer?
Sure. Firstly, to pick up on your first point, I mean, I think that I agree with you. I think during as I think they call them, the imprinting years of between 4 and 7 years old, people are fed a lot of misinformation about what men are good at or girls are good at and boys are good at. So I would agree with you up to a point, but I do think that our makeup is different, and I think it's dodging the point to suggest that they're not. I think in terms of how our salaries governed with men and women, you've got to look at how our salaries governed anyway, and that's by the market. Salaries are governed by how good you are, how much value you bring to a company. And I'm talking about in a commercial institution here. That may also include here who you know, and that's a relevant part of the conversation. And that may be discriminatory, but it is what it is, so we need to accept it.
All right, let me get Hema in on this. Now, Hema, we had you on a panel about 8-9 months ago talking about the idea that some scholars were suggesting that men are finished. When we looked at Western countries particularly, we see a majority of middle management being done by women. We see the majority of young women graduating from law school to be women, the majority of young people graduating from medical school to be women. I mean, this idea, women and men having different skills, was a big point during that debate, particularly from you saying that, well, women just are better at management and this type of stuff. Are we seeing that translating here in China?
Yes, of course, and I would like to say thanks to you, Brandon, that you still remember about that show.
How could I forget? I was told I was done. I was told I was a man, I was done.
Yes, thanks that you agree that you lost on that. Okay, yes, I do agree that women are good at, as we discussed in our last discussion as well, that, the HR departments in most of the companies are being taken, women are holding the main positions over there because that gives a soft touch to a company, and it shows that, yes, the company is very family friendly. Yes, we are seeing this trend in China as well. But I would like to say that everywhere except the contribution from women that tend to decline over a period of time. I mean, we have to take care of this point as well, because over a period of time, due to motherhood or maternity leave or travel constraints or more leaves or more flexibility is demanded. So, I mean, this is how, the Chinese company, they do justify that paying women less than men. I mean, and then, though not justified in all jobs, but physical strength is also used as an argument to pay less or discriminate. I mean, there was just in China Daily that a law firm bluntly told a lady applicant that she can't be selected for she's physically weak. But yes, girls are coming up, and this gap is closing. I mean, we can see that more of the girls are going and taking up medical degrees or law degrees and getting into technology.
Okay, but let me go to Robert on this. You brought up earlier that the market determines salaries, and when we talk about pay parity, okay, maybe industries, engineering versus another industry, you can make an argument about why is one industry higher paying than another, but why are female workers that work in engineering firms being paid less than the man they sit next to? Why are female lawyers that sit next to male lawyers being paid less than the male that's next to them?
Would you mind ever so much if I just brought another point in before I forget it? Because we haven't discussed this and it's relevant and important. I think in China in particular, we have it's well known that the family plays a huge part of the Chinese society, and it's hugely influential in how people make decisions. And I think the woman's role in the family has been so ingrained and deep-rooted for such a long time that this has had a natural influence in the woman's ambition, for example, for top positions. So I think this is really important to understand. And along with the rise in disposable income in China, you also have this, I would say, probably Julia would not like me saying so, but this rather trendy issue of work-life balance that everyone keeps talking about now, that now people have the income to spend, people can focus on their work and their life more. So if their family has collectively got a lot of money, which they can participate in, why should they be ambitious? You know, I hear a lot of people talking about the need to enjoy your life and don't work so hard and don't be so stressed. And that is coming from a lot of people's families a lot of the time, I believe. To come back to your question, I'm sorry to just diverge off.
I want to get into family flexibility, but I want to look at just the income for a second.
In my view, my company deals with professional recruiting in the graduate to middle senior management bracket. I have to say, I don't have any evidence that women are paid differently to men. Now, that may be because we don't focus on the right areas, but we work in highly, highly competitive jobs, and they would include lawyers or scientists, and it's a case of working very hard to get the right candidate. It's still a candidate-driven market, as we would say.
Okay, so I guess maybe this is one of the issues that we sort of brushed past too quickly, this idea that there has been a decline in pay parity. It's been quoted in the press, the All Women's China Federation says 10% drop in urban environments, 20% drop in rural environments. Julia Broussard, very basically here, do you believe that research, or do we believe the experiences of Robert saying in his experience there isn't really a pay disparity in the jobs?
I believe the research because it's looking at all workers across the spectrum, from those working in the informal sector where they don't have formal paid employment, but they are getting an income, all the way through the CEO of a major company. It's a spectrum, and it's across the spectrum that we see this drop in parity. And in those highly competitive companies, you're not going to see the big disparities. You're not going to see them there.
So it's in less competitive industries. It's sort of the ones that have a little more room to be.
Exactly. It's the people who are themselves marginalized in society, who have the less resources, who have less education, who have less access to opportunities, for whom the biggest drop has come. And we see that clearly in the distinction between the drop for urban women as opposed to rural women.
Yeah, and Julie, actually, it's a very striking figure that the collapse in pay parity in rural areas is 20%. So what do you think is the central causes for that? Is this only because the women are left behind in the rural and their rural male workers become migrant workers in the city?
I think there's two basic
reasons.
One, it's the patriarchal culture is even stronger in rural areas than it is in urban areas of China. But along with that, rural women have far less access to resources than urban women do. And basically, China is now a capitalist economy. If you're going to thrive in a capitalist economy, you have to have capital, access to financial resources, access to education, access to legal remedies if your rights are infringed upon, information. Rural women have less of all of those resources.
All right, but then we're going to take a pause in the conversation here. Julia Broussard, Robert Parkinson, Hema Kripalani with us. Next section of the show, we're going to touch on an issue that was brought up by Robert, particularly this work-life balance, and some of the issues on facing companies and hiring women with different circumstances family-wise. You're listening to Today on Beyond Beijing.
Missed some of today's big debate? No need to panic. Follow us on iTunes. Just search for Today on Beyond Beijing and subscribe to have our podcast delivered to you every day. Today on Beyond Beijing, bringing you the trends of tomorrow, today.
You're listening to Today on Beyond Beijing. I'm Brandon Blackburn-Dwyer. Today's big debate is on the income gap between Chinese women and men.
And I'm Jiao Yang. Today we are talking in the studio with Julia Broussard from Yun Women China office and Robert Parkinson from RMG International Business Consulting Corporation. And also join us on the phone is Hema Kripalani, a journalist working in Beijing.
Now, in our discussion, we've been talking about this idea of a fall in pay parity, with Robert saying in competitive industries, he's not finding it to be as true that there's really disparity in pay incomes, but Julia giving us statistics talking about really in the less competitive industries, particularly when people may not have as much resources, that they are really falling victim to this. But I want to get into one of the other aspects here. It was brought up by Robert a bit, that the issue of work-life balance and this issue and flexibility of working environments. Hema, looking at the situation for female workers around the world, generally, if a woman is going to have a child, then we have the issue of maternity leave. Different countries approach it differently, but all companies have to deal with the idea that they will, at some point in the maternity leave question, lose a presumably valuable worker for a period of time. So, I mean, can we say that some of the work-life balance that comes on here and some of the traditional expectations of female role in the family is causing corporations to sort of want to pay women less because they know they can't rely on them for his full-time work?
Yes and no, Brendan, because if a woman who joins a job and she gets pregnant and all, so then the company has not only count the pay cost, but they have to also the productivity loss due to the employee absence, and they have to take care of the cost to hire somewhere in lieu to do the absent worker job. The increased benefits do sometimes become a bottleneck. And what I feel is women are penalized for their dual role as wage earner and homemaker. Once maternity leave is required, more leaves, more time for the family, and it's a constant balancing act for them. So yes, I feel that the employers, they want to spend less on women employee, giving up all sort of reasons and all, which comes up that because, as I said, that after a while, the women tend to decline over a period of time.
Okay, Julia, how do you see the situation? I hate to try to justify sexual discrimination, but as a former small business owner, I know that dealing with maternity leave and losing a woman for 6 months that I have to hire and pay during that period of time is quite costly.
There's a solution to the problem that the Nordic countries are starting to implement, and that is requiring paternity leave. So putting the burden equally on both parents. So not just men might have an opportunity to take paternity leave, but they're actually required to take paternity leave. And then the burden is equally borne by both parents. And the burden isn't shifted disproportionately upon women. But I wanted to add that just in October, there came out a study conducted by the UN Research Institute for Social Development on unpaid work in China. They did a time use study comparing how much time women and men put into paid work and unpaid work. And not surprisingly, because more men are in the paid workforce, men were more likely to put a little more hours into paid work. But there was a huge burden in unpaid work on women. It came out very clearly in the data, primarily due to housework and childcare. And the study determined that it limits the opportunities of women in the long run vis-a-vis men.
So, Robert, I mean, can we blame companies for that? If women are going to be putting in more hours at home and thus can't be putting in as many hours in paid work, should we be blaming companies for reacting to that situation by prioritizing men?
Well, look, let me give you my views on this because I feel quite strongly about this, actually. What a missed opportunity for companies who make it difficult for women to have children. You know, where would the human race be if we all stopped having babies? You know, not very far. Showing women that your company is not just accepts and will pay you your maternity leave, but encourages it, makes it easy for you, supports you in that process. What a great message to your staff in your company. What a lot of loyalty and traction you'll gain from that. And that's how really companies that I've worked in have behaved. And the resulting situation you get from that is people actually work whilst they're on maternity leave. They stay engaged, they stay in touch with the office. I think companies who avoid hiring women because they think they might get pregnant, well, most women will if they're lucky, it's just nuts. It really is. There's no way to run a business.
Let me just ask you, and again, as a former small business owner, I have to tell you that the differences between working in a Fortune 500 company that has the national resources and international resources to support that type of pro-family attitude versus a smaller, medium-sized enterprise that has 3 or 4 workers and loses 25% of the workforce for 6 months, it's very different.
So,
I mean,
as with anything in business, you have to budget for it. And,
okay.
Similarly, my company employs around 100 people. That's something I've funded entirely by myself. That's a small business. We have at least 2/3 of the staff are women because they're better staff. That's how I'm making the choice. I'm not making the choice based on are they a man or a woman. I'm making the choice based on are they any good or not. And, like anything in business, you have to make allowances for it. If the economy is looking difficult, you make an allowance for that fact. You make sure you have money ready to cover it.
But part of the burden should not be borne. Well, the burden should not be borne exclusively by the company. Part of the burden should be borne by the state. The state has an obligation, if it's signed on to international conventions on anti-discrimination in employment, to provide services that support women, such as subsidized daycare or requiring paternity leave. Then the burden isn't shifted only on your company, it's shifted across all companies.
Right. And I think, as far as I remember, in the latest China's latest labour law amendments, having greater maternity leave was part of that process. It hasn't actually happened in my current company, but I can remember having several people on maternity leave, and we were recompensed for the cost. So it really was a win-win. And actually, they worked harder because they had to pay for the new baby when it came along.
And also, we have a very good debate on this. But Hammer, I will shift our focus to the statistics show that the entrepreneurs actually the women make up about 45% of all employees on the Chinese mainland. But the figures shows that only 1 in 4 entrepreneurs is female. And Hammer, some say that women across the world are less likely to be entrepreneurs. Do you agree with that?
I mean, for this is like I would like to point out that women they are like more cautious and generally risk averse, while entrepreneurship demands taking huge risk. So, I mean, with better education and equal access to opportunities and with use of modern technology, internet, women are now able to overcome the barrier. Now, women fare equal as men, and in near future, I see them starting more business rivaling the main counterparts.
And Julie, how do you see it? And are there any specific limitations in China?
Well, I think one of the reasons we see fewer women entrepreneurs in terms of percentage is a lack of access to capital. You have to have resources to be able to take that risk to start an entrepreneurial company. And overall, women have less access to those resources than men. But I also agree that overall women are more risk averse than men are. But I think that stems from their maternal role. Their role in the family. If they know they're going to be taking care of children in the future or already are taking care of children, they're less likely to make that jump in starting up a new company than a man is.
And my perspective on that would be more from the people I've just happened to have met in the last 8 years or so. And I would say that it's the women, absolutely, that make the better entrepreneurs in terms of the people I've met. Far more controlled, far more cutthroat, far more aware, far greater sense of EQ, and you know, the guys, I have to say, particularly the more traditional Chinese guys, are still very concerned with their relationships and dinner parties and drinking. I mean, we've covered this a bit before, but that's certainly my perspective. I find the women in China very strong.
All right, well, we're going to take a pause so I can apparently go have some drinks and, some baijiu. But we have Julia Broussard, Robert Parkinson, and Hema Kripalani. Last section of the show, we're really going to focus in on all of the issues that we've talked about. Is this a problem that needs to be solved, and who should be solving it? You're listening to Today on Beyond Beijing.
Listen to us on the go by subscribing to Today on Beyond Beijing's podcast on iTunes, or listen online at radio.weibo.com and search for AM 846.
In today's Online Unleashed, Simone Cote will bring you views from the internet on right-to-work laws. And in our Spotlight, John Artman will bring you stories from the tech world. Tech giants Dubai Kodak patents, Steve Jobs' patent rejected, and Alipay's mobile financial service. All that and more in our Global Talk in Today on Beyond Beijing.
You're listening to Today on Beyond Beijing. I'm Brandon Blackburn-Dwyer. Today's big debate is on the income gap between Chinese women and men.
And I'm Zhao Yang. Today we are talking in the studio with Julia Broussard from UN Women China office and also Robert Parkinson from RMG International Business Consulting Corporation. And also joining us on the phone is Hema Kripalani, a journalist working in Beijing.
Now, during our discussion, of course, the situation of men and women in China, we've talked a bit about social issues, corporate issues, income differential issues, differences in entrepreneurs, and the role of women in the workplace and in the home and how that interacts with hiring and pay issues. Now, I want to get into all of the issues we've talked about. They are very obviously issues of concern, but are they truly a problem to be solved? And I ask this meaning, if it's truly a problem to be solved, it really means that it requires some sort of specific action or policy response from the government or companies. So I guess very briefly, I'm going to ask each of you sort of a yes or no. Yes or no, is this a problem that actively needs to be solved, Julia?
Absolutely. We have to solve the problem. But it's going to take an onslaught of solutions. There's not one fix to this problem.
Okay, so absolutely needs to be fixed. Robert, I mean, from the corporate side?
I agree, absolutely. It's a problem that needs to be solved because women have been sidelined in the Chinese society for far too long, in all respects.
And Hema?
Yes, definitely. I do agree.
Okay. So, Julia, if it's such a big and important problems to solve, so the government, the company, and the society, which do you think should do more and how?
They all have to work together. It's not a question of who does more. The government has to enforce the laws that are existing, and it has to create a few new laws to reduce discrimination. Companies have to wake up to their responsibilities to abide by these laws. They have to go beyond the laws. I think Robert made a very good point. It is actually in the interests of companies to support women. There was a wonderful study done by a professor at Pepperdine University. The title was "More Women in the Executive Suite Correlate to Higher Profits." And it was a study of Fortune 500 companies. Companies that have more women in executive positions are getting better profits. And companies need to wake up to that reality. In terms of society, it's everybody's responsibilities. And the message is that men and women are equal, what the fundamental reality of gender equality has to get out there.
Okay,
Yeah,
Robert.
Right. I mean, I actually would agree with much of what Julia says there. I think it's not actually an issue simply of gender equality. I think it's an issue of diversity in general, and companies understanding the benefits to the balance sheet of diversity. And I think, this problem, as with most problems, it won't change all at once. How do you eat an elephant one slice at a time, right? So I think it means lots of small changes. And for example, I understand that some universities discriminate against women, bizarrely, based on giving them a higher score to reach to gain admission when men get jobs more easily after university. That seems a bizarre paradox. You would seem to think you'd be looking to level the playing field. I think a lot of this goes back to the fact that if you scratch beneath the surface and you go beneath the first and second tier cities, China is still a hugely traditional society that goes back thousands and thousands of years, and it's very difficult to change people's values, which is really what we're talking about here, overnight. That would be what I would say. And again, just to echo Julia's point, I think it's really important to enforce the laws. I think China can make great progress in a whole manner of areas, not just diversity and gender equality, by actually following up and doing what you say you're going to do.
And for the company's level, so how do you suggest that the small business should do?
Well, I think that I think if you show people your attitude a lot of the time, if you show people you are willing to be as flexible as you possibly can be, then my experience has been that people tend to be flexible towards you. So I take the point that if you're a 4-person company, you can't possibly have a corporate creche and babysitting facilities and the likes of what Coca-Cola or Pepsi might do. But if you're flexible with, for example, timings, one of the things we do with our mothers in the company is if they have to take their child to the hospital, we just say that's absolutely no problem. Your child must come first. And if they believe, and you've got to be sincere about it because everyone can spot a lie, but if you believe sincerely that that child's interest must come first, then the loyalty and the buy-in from the staff member would be amazing. Because how many other companies is that the case?
Okay. So, Hema, let's go to you on this question. For rural areas and urban areas, how different are the solutions for these two areas, income inequality?
See, for rural solution, I'll just say that women in rural area, first they need the basic rights to be addressed, like access to healthcare and education. And after that, something can be done. And if we talk about urban solution, then it has to be the better enforcement of laws, raising the law awareness. And government should promptly investigate the complaints and create an environment where women can speak up for their rights. And as far as I was reading, one of the researchers stated to solve this problem, is that we need to raise the minimum wage and improve enforcement of equal employment opportunity laws, help women succeed in higher paying and traditionally male occupation, and create more flexible, family-friendly workplace policies. And government can also give tax rebates to company and individuals. These are the steps which can be taken at both rural and the urban areas. And as far as individuals are concerned, the women should learn to stand up for their own cause. Familiarize themselves with pay scales in their field and learn to negotiate. And as far as business and companies are concerned, they're urged to offer transparent pay information to employees and as well as hire and pay them without bias.
That's a really good point. Just really quickly, I think being transparent about pay is very important in companies because people tell each other how much they're paid anyway. So you might as well have a fixed system of internal equity and stick to it.
Okay, now I have to ask Julia, all these ideas, workers being able to stand up for themselves, improving the minimum income, the pay transparencies. As a man, I'd love all of those things equally as much, if not, more than some of my female colleagues. Are these fixes that will truly balance income inequality across the genders, or we talking about first we need to simply improve the experiences of workers of all genders?
Well, I think when you tackle gender discrimination, you're actually improving the situation for everyone, for men, not just women. It's in men's interest to have more income transparency, not just in women's interest. And I agree with all of the solutions that Robert and Hema have just recited, but I want to add one more, and that is men's support for these measures. We are always talking about we need to do this for women, for women, for women, for women. What about men? What is men's role in supporting gender equality? That message has to get out there.
Robert, you're the man on the panel. Why are men speaking up enough on this?
Well, I mean, I've always been very keen and interested in women of all genders and races, but
this isn't a dating service, Robert.
For me, it always comes back to business. Is it good business? Can you afford not to do these things? Can you afford not to pay people fairly? Can you afford not to treat people in an equal way? I think any company can't not, as it were, afford to do these things, because if you make a mistake, like, for example, if you take a shortcut by paying a woman less than a man, as soon as another opportunity comes along, she's going to be off to that opportunity. So really, in a sense, there might be some short-term gains, but you're shooting yourself in the foot in the long run.
Okay, so Hema, so for the outlook, will women in China be treated more equally?
Okay, it depends. I mean, the equal treatment, if it's the same pay, same role, same responsibilities, then yes. I mean, women will be treated equally. And if they have to work longer hours than their male counterparts, they have to work more to prove their capabilities, and indirectly if they are paid lower, then they are not going to be treated equally. And companies which are traditionally dominated by men, like China Shipping Group and NetEase.com, I mean, they are recruiting more female staff now. So I think the progress is being made. And progress has also been made on segregation of labor market. I mean, with many male-dominated fields, including law, banking, medicine, civil service jobs, like bus drivers, taxi drivers, mail carriers are opening to women. I feel that they'll be treated equally in China.
And Julie, how do you see it?
I'm an optimist, so yes, I think the prospects are good. I see in the past 10 years a lot of gains. Despite the decline in pay parity, there's a much greater awareness, it's huge, of women's rights in this country.
All right. And last thoughts here, Robert?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think it's really easy to forget how it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago, to kind of echo Julie's point. And, we have short memories. And, in fact, an awful lot has changed. And, again, holding up this Monday's South China Morning Post, headline is HK missing female touch in boardroom. So clearly this is a topic of public debate. And after all, Hong Kong is part of China now. So, it's a debate going on.
Not that hurts the British point of view there at all, but talking about Hong Kong. But now, keeping us on topic here, we're going to do a bit of a wrap-up here, a couple of yes and no questions to review the key points. Looking at the opening question of the show, yes or no, is there a working crisis for women in China? Yes or no, Julia?
Not quite a crisis, but yes.
Okay, Robert?
No.
Hema?
Yes. Not so severe, but yes, it is.
Okay. Have we seen a drastic drop in pay parity over the last decade? Yes or no, Julia?
Yes, absolutely.
Robert?
No. Lies, damn lies, and statistics.
No, yes, definitely, there is.
Okay. And are Chinese companies sexist, in your opinion? On the average here, do we consider Chinese companies sexist? Yes or no, Julia?
On the average, yes.
Robert?
Yes.
Hema?
Oh, yes.
Now, does China need to improve the written laws on sexual and gender discrimination? Yes or no, Julia?
No, they need to improve enforcement.
Okay.
Agree completely, and they need to enforce.
And Hema?
Yes, I agree with Julie.
All right. And will Chinese companies actually treat companies better if the laws were to improve, or can we actually see them actually treating people better? Yes or no, Julia?
Yes, I think so.
Robert?
Some will.
Hema?
Yes, some.
All right. And are you optimistic or pessimistic about the income gap between men and women? Are we going to see it closing? Optimistic or pessimistic, Julia?
Optimistic in the long term.
Robert?
Yeah, very optimistic.
And Hema?
It's about women's revolution, Brendan. I want you to say again, I lost again.
Oh, as always, Emma, always hammering me away. But unfortunately, I get to end this great debate. So thanks to our guests. We've been speaking in the studio with Julia Broussard, Country Program Manager at the UN Women China Office, as well as Robert Parkinson, founder and CEO of RMG, International Business Consulting Corporation. On the phone, we had Hema Kripalani, journalist and radio host working here in Beijing. But tomorrow's big debate is on the UK inquiry into its media industry. But stay with us now for the Global Talk as we debate the events of today.